Erev Kaf B'Sivan Parashas Shlach Tavshin Pedalos 5784. The evening of the third day, Tuesday, June 25, 2024. You listen to Phantom Nation, aka the program coming to you from the land of Israel. But don't tell that to the latest in a series of American Jew boy ambassadors, Mr. Jack Lew. Jack Lew spoke yesterday in Herzliya at the Reichman University and said U.S. support for Israel in its war against Hamas is supported. To defeat Hamas as a military and governing power, he said. The provision of humanitarian assistance, he also said, has been crucial to keeping the pathway open to success when the war ends, though there has to be a vision for a future. Israel can't be exposed to another October 7th, but there also has to be a conversation about the future of the Palestinian people and a pathway toward a future of self-government. Israel is on the brink of being accepted by all the moderate Arab countries. I don't think you can get there if you don't also have a pathway for dealing with the legitimate interests of the Palestinian people. Getting a Palestinian state, demilitarized, autonomous governing body that provides security and dignity. That would be a defeat for Hamas, close quote. Yeah, all those moderate Arab states like Syria, Iraq, Yemen, Algeria, Libya, Lebanon. Yeah, that would be a defeat for Hamas, he says. Jack Lew presents himself to the world as a modern Orthodox Jew. He is a member, I believe, of Avi Weiss's Riverdale congregation, where a reliable report is that the rabbi there now is a woman, but she amputated her breasts and is now a man, so it's okay to be a rabbi. Jack Lew here claims to be an Orthodox Jew, but here he is concerned for the Palestinian people, as he calls them, and describes the two-state solution, which makes no sense. It's profoundly illogical. Caring for the ancient Palestinians is simply not a Jewish concern. On the contrary, Jack Lew supports his leader, Joe Biden, that sleazeball con man, in promoting the transfer of de facto governance in Judea and Samaria from Israel to the Muslim Brotherhood. When Orthodox Judaism takes seriously the very first recorded conversation between man and the creator of all that is, God tells Abraham to go to a country that he will show him. It's right there in their first conversation. That command is then repeated numerous times in the generations to come from Abraham. Many times. And one year, I was aware of that and wanted to know exactly how many times that promise is made. In my former life as an ignorant Jew, I may have thought it was made only once on some important occasion. No, in search of an answer to my question, I began to count the times the promise is made. Each week in learning the Parsha, I would count them and mark down the number. And after a year, I added up all 54 numbers, and the result was 180. 180 times in the 5 books, the promise of Little Canaan, land of Canaan, is made. That's 180, that's 18, gematria for life, times 10 of the Kabbalistic 10, the 10 fingers and toes we are born with. Life, 18 times 10, is embedded in the promise of this land to this people, but Jack Lew thinks Judea should belong to the Muslims. Specifically, he's concerned for the Palestinian people, that's his lotion, his language, who have quote-unquote legitimate interests. He envisions a demilitarized state that will provide them with security and dignity. And I ask, where in the 5 books are we Jews enjoined to cooperate in the creation of an independent state of homicidal sex maniacs for whom murdering us is a religiously glorious thing to do? Jack Lew, like Obama, supports the legitimate interests of the Palestinian people, which include owning Judea and Samaria, which is in effect a license for Jew killing, de facto. By supporting Palestinian ownership of Judea and Samaria, judging Israel to be the illegal squatter, Israel will of course not comply with that and evacuate, but the recognition is sufficient to cause pain. And what it does is it legitimizes murdering the Jews because they're squatters on land that doesn't belong to them. People understand Arab terrorism because of that fact. Their propensity for the satanic murder of Jews at random is thus, in their own eyes, justified. They are the chronic daily victims of Zionists in occupation of Palestinian land. Jack Lew envisioned a demilitarized state of Palestine, which is absolutely meaningless. These people don't need a military, they don't need an army, they don't need a navy, they don't need an air force. All they need is guns, small arms, knives, bomb-making material. These people are murderers at heart. They're not soldiers. The military doesn't apply to them. Their understanding of war is murdering the enemy people in ambush, when they're least expecting an attack, civilians, not combatants, and they are perfectly defenseless when they're murdered. That is war to this primitive people, primitive to the extent they have no moral scruple about kidnapping defenseless enemy civilians and using them as shields. This is what Yahya Sinwar, head of Hamas, has been doing for 8 months, surrounding himself with Jewish bodies, living ones. The Arabs have a long recorded history of kidnapping enemy people, meaning taking them as hostage. The misnamed Barbary pirates were not pirates, but in their own eyes jihadis that had the divine right to kidnap infidels and enslave them, to do to them what the demons in Gaza, as I speak, have been doing to our Jewish brothers and sisters for 8 months. These Muslims have no moral inhibitions about doing this to total strangers as part of their hunger for something. The crime of the Jews, for them, is stealing Palestine from the Palestinians. And that has been so enormous that the PFLP liked to skyjack airliners and believed they had the right to board an airliner with a hidden weapon, whip out the weapon, skyjack the airliner with its innocent passengers and crews, all who have nothing to do with their holy war against the Jews. There's something defective in this culture. There's people who call planting a bomb under the tomatoes in a Jewish market on Friday that explodes and kills and maims Jews shopping for Shabbos and maims the survivors, that is a military operation. That's what they call it. You all know the PA pays with money the state of Israel sends their way as salaries to the Jew killers in our prisons and their families, because in Arab Muslim minds, these are not terrorists. They consider them soldiers in the jihad, masquerading as Palestinian nationalists. And we know this from the very name Fatah, Arafat's gang, a chapter title in the Quran. Arafat's father headed the clandestine Muslim Brotherhood in Mandatory Palestine. Arafat and all his 7 other founders of Fatah grew up in the Brotherhood's youth group. Those idiots, Perez and Rabin, believed there was a difference between those secular nationalists in Fatah and those terrible religious fanatics in Hamas. No self-respecting Jew, let alone in the mold of a modern Orthodox Jack Lew, should be concerned for the welfare of the Palestinian people, because there is no Palestinian people. Their entire sob story is taurine excreta, and no Jew should respect the claim these people make. This people that does not speak its own Palestinian language and practice its own Palestinian religion, as we Jews speak our own ancient language and practice our own ancient religion rooted in this country. No self-respecting Jew should ever care at all for the Palestinian people, to whom we owe nothing. The entirety of their complaint and cause is a lie. There never was here such a people, and we did not steal their land from them. Every piece of evidence of life in this country prior to the late 19th century and the birth of the Zionist movement is evidence there never was here such a people, calling themselves Palestinians and being called that by others. No less evidence are the paintings of the land painted by famous world-class painters prior to the Zionist movement in the mid-19th century. Also, in the mid-19th century and onward, we have black and white photographs. Photography came into use in the 1840s. All these photos and paintings are evidence of the desolation that was Eretz Yisrael, precisely because there was no nation living in it and caring for it. When Mark Twain made his pilgrimage in 1867, there were no roads, only animal tracks crisscrossing the wilderness. Railroads had been operating in England, I think, for several decades at this point. There were no railroads, let alone highways. And to go from Jaffa port to Jerusalem in that year meant hiring beasts of burden for their luggage, of men who owned the camels and the donkeys or whatever and had weapons. For the countryside was lawless, and there were Bedouin for whom armed robbery of innocent travelers was perfectly kosher. It was a 2-day journey in those days. You had to spend the night on the road. When later in his travels, Mark Twain reached Tiberias on the Sea of Galilee and wanted to see Mount Tabor, he rode on horseback the whole day from Tiberias to Mount Tabor and never saw another human being on the way. Israel has to refurbish its public diplomacy, claim all the land from the river to the sea as rightly Jewish land, and simultaneously, metaphorically speaking, set fire to anti-Jew propaganda about a Palestinian people with legitimate rights to a state on the land the Almighty promised to the Jews 180 times in the 5 books of Moses. To Abraham, Hashem promised this land right there at the beginning, and at the end of the 5 books, there's Moses, his great-grandson's great-grandson, last seen standing on the east bank and looking longingly westward over at the land promised to his great-grandfather's great-grandfather 500 years in the past.
אוויר הרים צלול כיין וריח אורנים ניסה ברוח הערביים עם כל פעמונים ובתרדמת אילן ואבן שבויה בחלומה העיר אשר בדד יושבת ובליבה חומה ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושל אור הלא לכל שירייך אני קינו ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושל אור הלא לכל שירייך אני קינו אך בבואי היום לשיר לך ולך לקשור כתרים קטונתי מצעיר בנייך ומאחרון המשוררים כי שמך צורף את השפתיים נשיקת זהב, אם אשכחך ירושלים אשר כולה זהב. ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושל אור, הלא לכל שירייך אני כינור. ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושל אור, הלא לכל שירייך אני
And that was Yossi Azulai doing Jerusalem of Gold. So, I say shame on Jack Lew, the self-defined Orthodox Jew who believes Judea should be handed over to the Muslim Brotherhood, that has no rival among the Arabs in Gaza, Judea, and Samaria of any importance. I sometimes wish I was an accredited journalist who could attend a briefing to the press given by Jack Lew, and I would ask him to describe his vision of the future for the 500,000 Jews in their homes in Judea and Samaria after he installs the Muslim Brotherhood as the legitimate government. I would ask him if he foresees the same fate for the 500,000 Jews living in Judea and Samaria as those 10,000 in 2005 driven from their homes. Does he foresee erecting refugee camps for these 500,000 Jews? It should be clear to any thinking person that the two-state solution is nothing but a fantasy of resurrecting archaic, Gentile, anti-Jew desire and behavior of chronically expelling Jews from their homes. Expelled not only from, in history, countries, England, France, Spain, but in between the less famous, in between the famous expulsions, there were expulsions from cities, provinces, dukedoms. The Goyim like to see us wandering Jews expelled, homeless, in the vernacular for killing God. My late mother of blessed memory, as a girl in the Bronx a century ago, once had a Catholic girl in the neighborhood point at her and say, "You killed God." Today, the lie of Palestinian nationalism has taken the place of the deicide charge, the justification for hating and aggressing against Jews in this generation. As we killed Jesus, so we stole Palestine from the Palestinians. And at this very moment, we are committing genocide against them. And as further evidence of the success of the invention of the Palestinians, you have not only a Jack Lew type of character for whom a cushy job in Washington is worth selling out the Jewish people's right to Judea and Samaria and Gaza. We also have academics like Dr. Daniel Pipes, who has a new book out, which is further evidence of his own adopting the politically correct anti-Jew posture of concern for the Palestinians and their future. Pipes, I believe, is one of the inventors and certainly supporters of those new words in our language, Islamism and Islamists, which, as far as I can tell, were invented by academics like him in order to shield their profession, their field of study, from any connection to the atrocities perpetrated by Muslims in the name of Islam. Pipes and others believe there's such a thing as Islam, and there's also Islamism. That's the same thing. Muslims exist, but also Islamists, who are identified as violent extremists, unrepresentative of mainstream Islam. Remember President Bush on 9/11, who said Islam is a religion of peace, and therefore those who did what they did that day were not representative of Islam, but of Islamism, which turns Islam into a violent political aggression when most Muslims are not themselves terrorists. Which, by the way, is true, but also true is that the majority of them commonly applaud the terrorists. They hand out candy in the street when a Jew is slaughtered. Pipes, in his new book, evidently exposes his little knowledge of the Zionist movement. I believe his dissertation was likely connected to something in Islam. He spent 2 years of study in Cairo, and in any case, reliable sources say he is legally a Jew, but had no religious upbringing whatsoever. And in his new book, he seems unaware of how ignorant the Zionist pioneers were of Islam, if they thought, as they did, that being nice to them would make them friends. Pipes' central advice to Israel these days is to stop trying to be nice to the Palestinians, but thoroughly to defeat them, I don't know if that's impossible, and make them accept Israel's right to exist. He refers to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. He also refers to the, quote, Palestinian Arab enemy. He calls for Israel to destroy the foul Hamas and PA. And then he says we will rebuild by working with the growing body of Palestinian Arabs ready to come to terms with the existence of Israel and seek to benefit from it. This means first constructing administrations in Gaza and the West Bank by working directly with moderate Palestinian Arabs. It means supporting the voices of moderates, close quote. That's right, Dr. Pipes. There's just moderates all over the place. Though you, like all others, never name them. You never name a leader of the moderates, the name of his organization. He wants to see decisively the destruction of the Palestinians and their will to resist. Experiencing the bitter crucible of defeat, ironically, will benefit Palestinian Arabs, he said, even more than Israelis, allowing them finally to emerge from a long miasma of nihilism. Finally, the Palestinians can develop the polity, economy, society, and culture worthy of being dignified and ambitious a people. Think of them as a miniature version of Germans and Japanese in 1945. But that can only happen when we break the Israeli tradition of conciliation and instead seek total victory. Israel must ultimately take the fateful step that breaks with over a century of Zionist history. Well, actually, I agree with this approach. I've long said Israel must fight for its right to call the land west of the river and forget about friendship, the right to evict the UNRWA scam and its freeloaders. Where I part company with Pipes is his ignorance of Zionist history, which was an effort to shed their religious identity and thereby defang Gentile hatred of them, in particular those of the Arabs. To teach the world that we Israelis are different from the Jews you all hated. We Israelis are not like them at all. now is pianist David Gerwitz. And you're listening to the program on phantomnation.com. So yes, I do agree with Dr. Pipes that Israel has to end its eternally failing courtship of the enemy, but I disagree with him that the enemy is the Palestinian enemy. He wants Israel to decisively conquer the Palestinians and transform them. When I say the enemy is not Palestinians, it's the Iranians. Palestinians are nothing but a creation and the puppets of Muslims elsewhere and other Jew-hating Gentiles who funnel billions of dollars to them and euros. The Palestinians on the UNRWA rolls have never been forced to support themselves, to restart their lives in a country of refuge, which is normal. The only purpose of UNRWA is to keep alive the successor to the deicide charge, the anti-Semitic fantasy that the Jews stole Palestine from the Palestinians, whose spawn suffer to this very day. Daniel Pipes, he seems unaware, sounds exactly like the Zionist pioneers of the left, who believed being nice to the Arabs would turn them into friendly neighbors. By and large, like Pipes, they were not religious and apparently deaf and blind to the religiosity of the enemy. 1948, David Ben-Gurion famously allowed a few hundred Haredim to avoid army service in exchange for their political support in the belief that next year there will be fewer in number, and every year fewer and fewer, because religion had become out of fashion. They eventually would disappear. Eventually there would be no more Haredim avoiding a military service, which, by the way, is this very day a major news item. The High Court ruled unanimously that not only the Haredim must go into the service, there is no basis in law for financially supporting the yeshivas where these draft evaders learn. It's a major issue in Israel now. I never deal with it. I do not hate the Haredim for not wanting to serve in the army. I understand them completely. For there they would mix with non-Jewish boys and girls whose culture is not Jewish. It's the corrupt and perverted version of popular culture in the West today. Still, I reject their refusal to compensate for their avoiding the army by doing alternate service, which would also go a long way to reducing the hostility to them. I don't mind them avoiding army service because, from my experience, they don't belong in the army. These are not boys who grow up worshiping professional athletes. They don't trade baseball cards, but pictures of famous rabbis. And they have no experience of scantily clad singers and dancers. Their lifestyle excludes professional athletes, and they themselves are physically unsuited for military warfare. But what I think grates as much as anything on those who are hostile to them is refusing to sacrifice of themselves for others. An 18-year-old secular male, given his druthers, will not serve in the army. He does not fancy crawling around in the dirt in basic training. He wants to be a free young man. Versus the Haredi, who is doing, in his own eyes, and rightfully so, a great service for the Jewish people. I truly believe that by learning all the time. But the difference between him and the IDF recruit is that he enjoys what he's doing. He likes learning. He sacrifices nothing for other Jews in the land of Israel. In sum, for Jack Lew and Daniel Pipes, we Jews in Eretz Israel are under an obligation to give a hoot about the Arabs here who in their majority smile on Hamas. These people are not Palestinians, and they would not exist without the backing of Iran and other Gentile lovers of the verbal hologram of the Palestinians, this generation's designated victims of the evil Jews.
שום שקט, אין בזה שום
And that was Yehuda Glantz. Okay, that's it for this other weekly freebie podcast for those who want 3 a week, each one costing a minuscule $1.25 each. Please subscribe at phantom-nation.com. You might also want to check out what others have called the best book ever on Israel, and a literary masterpiece to boot, The War Against Israel, called Phantom Nation, Inventing the Palestinians as the Obstacle to Peace. Until next time, I'm Sha'i, Ben-tekoa. Shalom.